All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Having a small crowd is always a good sign because the people in the small crowd are the most engaged, the most interested, the best and the brightest, I said this morning. Thank you for coming so far. The event with the African president went into overtime, and people are just, moving out. But I think we should just start our conversation here, just fair to the participants. Right. So at the Rhodes Forum so far, we've heard a lot about China, about U.S.-Chinese relationships, trade relationships. We've heard a lot about Africa. We've heard a lot about India. This is the moment where we want to talk about Eurasia. And this kind of reflects the reality in the public mind, in the media, because Eurasia is not people's top concern. It's people look to America, people look to Asia, to China, India, Europe, of course. But in the shadow of the global discourse, the global debates that we're having, there is Eurasia, and it's an area that is becoming increasingly important, and we're going to talk about this today with our panelists. And with me this afternoon is Gauka Nogalieva. She is currently the head of the Eurasian Studies Lab at the Institute of Emerging Market Studies in Moscow. I will be asking you about that Eurasian Lab. I'm interested in that. To her left, Andreas Knaul, who is an executive with Rödl and Partner and has many, many years of experience in Russia and in the area we're discussing here. To his left, welcome Bruno Maçães, former Minister of European Affairs of Portugal and author of 2 books, is that correct, about Eurasia? In 1 year, right. One of them, The Dawn of Eurasia, and the second one is Belt and Road. Well, welcome to our panel. And last but not least, Michael Bröser, also an executive with Dürr Systems. I understand it's a spare part maker.
No, we built automotive factories. Not the building, but everything what is inside. Paint shops, final assembly lines, also aircraft hangars, and we also work for the railway industry. So automotive industry, aircraft and railway.
Neighboring industries, yes. Let's put it like this. And you also have many years of experience, I should say.
Similar like Andreas, I live and work since 13 years in Moscow and serve the former Soviet Union, so including all the surrounding states.
Good.
Around Russia.
And to his right is our friend Vladimir Popov, who gave us this map. And Vladimir, I want to ask you about this in a minute. But last but not least, Niros, who will give concluding remarks at the end of the session here. All right. So if you look at this map, what do we see, Vladimir? Just in a couple of words, tell us what this is.
This is a pretty famous map that is circulating all over internet, and this is the map where the size of the countries is proportionate to their purchasing power parity GDP. Purchasing power parity means that GDP is measured in the same prices, say in American prices or some kind of international prices. Once you apply the same prices to the GDP of all components of the GDP of all the countries, this is what you get. You see in green China, which is very large. It's about $20 trillion GDP, roughly. The total world GDP is about $100 trillion. You see United States, also about 20 or 18 or 22, I forgot, trillion dollars GDP, roughly equal. You see Europe, which is also European Union, about $25 trillion GDP. In Europe, you can see the biggest countries, France and Germany. Germany is the biggest, of course. And you can see that Africa is pretty small, Latin America is also pretty small, and Russia is on top of China. This is the gray, greenish strip of land. Russian GDP is only about $3 trillion as compared to 20-something trillion dollars for China, for Europe, and for the United States. So the interesting thing, why do we need this map? There is a gravity theory of international trade which says that trade between countries is proportionate to their GDP. The GDP is like the mass that creates gravity. So if China has a big GDP, then many countries will trade with China. It's interesting that now for African countries, China is becoming #1 trading partner. For Germany, China is #1 trading partner. For the United States, China is #1 trading partner. After Mexico and Canada, previously it was Mexico, Canada. Even for countries like Brazil, China is becoming, if not the greatest trading partner, then a very substantial trading partner. So the gravity forces are working in the world economy.
Mm-hmm. What we can also say, I think that's fair, if we look at Russia and the Eurasian countries, the countries east of Poland, there is room for improvement, right? And I want to ask our business executives here at the table about their experience with Russia, Michael and Andreas. Andreas, maybe I start with you. You have many years, 25 plus years of experience with Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, etc. When you started working with these countries, in these countries, and if you compare that to today, what has changed? How has the region evolved? Would you like to share that with us?
Sure. Thanks, Stefan, for inviting me and for this question. Actually, I'm not really an executive. I'm a business lawyer, and I work for clients who are mainly from Germany, medium-sized companies, which come to the region, as you described.
Move up the microphone. Yeah.
Russia, Central Asia, or Ukraine, former Soviet Union countries. So what did these clients see in '93 when I started working? They saw the remains of an empire which had dissolved into sovereign national states with their own national legal orders, which were about to form. So we saw ruins of an empire which had to be rebuilt into a modern economy, market economy, with a respective legal system. This legal system was obviously very rudimentary 25 years ago. And over the last years, we've seen an approach in most of these countries, which you described, which is oriented towards following the model of Germany to some extent the United States. But mainly from a legal point of view, we see following the continental legal model. So Russia, for example, has adopted a company law which is modeled after the German GmbH, which is in Russia the limited liability company. So from a business point of view, we see very much increased legal safety and security because adopted and experienced models over the world were adopted not only in Russia, but also in Kazakhstan, or for example in Ukraine and other countries which you mentioned. So over the last 25 years, we have seen a steady improvement of the investment climate and doing business climate, we see testimony to that in the Ease of Doing Business Index, which is being done by the World Bank every year. Russia has now taken the 31st place, and Kazakhstan is even on the 28th place of the Ease of Doing Business in this index, which is objectively done every year by the World Bank. So in one word, summarizing up, we have seen a steady improvement of the business climate in the countries you mentioned, and I'm confident this will increase in the future years.
Michael, same question to you. Is Russia ready for business?
Same experience for me. Same experience for me. When we came to Russia in 2005, we saw a booming country, 6 to 8% growth rates. Automotive industry moved there. There was a big hype. We built 15 automotive plants in Russia. And nowadays, and also due to the Crimea crisis which we had, also due to missing reforms, and also I see a big problem due to Russia is ruled by very large companies like Gazproms and Lukoils. They have no medium size and small size industry. This is, I think, the backbone of Germany. What Andreas was saying, they're trying to copy a little bit Germany, the business model of Germany. but they have a lack in the medium and small industry businesses. And I see today a stagnation. There are, as I said before, missing reforms, and the business model just based on selling natural resources is not something you can do for very long, and it comes somehow to an end. And what we see now, they must do some reforms. There must be a change in order to go the next step forward.
Gauka, you have worked at the Eurasian Economic Commission. When you hear the two accounts, do you agree? Do we need more reforms? You work in a lab. What is your assessment?
Thank you, Stefan. First of all, before the Eurasian Economic Commission, I was responsible for the foreign direct investment to Kazakhstan as a managing director, at first at the Investment Promotion Agency, and then thereafter as a managing director for investment at the state-owned mining company of Kazakhstan. So I know what the investors what do they feel when they come to markets such as ours, emerging, and in some countries of Central Asia, for example, are frontier markets. So reflecting from my experience from the Eurasian Economic Commission, when I was an advisor to the head commissioner from Kazakhstan on transport and infrastructure, a lot of work was then already being done on aligning the shared use of infrastructure. It should be noted that most of the infrastructure that we have and that we built from our legacy from the Soviet Union. So that's something that we need to modernize, something that we need to build upon. But more importantly, there is a historical fact that that infrastructure was shared before. And that gives an opportunity to do so now as well, given the right regulations that would allow that.
All right, thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
In your second question to what my colleagues had said earlier, indeed, I agree that there is, now I'm a part of the Skolkovo School, which is a leading Russian business school where I am responsible for the research on geoeconomics of the Eurasian region. And we see that there is indeed a slowdown of the economy in Russia for that. I mean, obviously, there are many reasons for that. However, the driver for the economic growth of the region is in Eurasia, in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, and that I hope we will discuss later in our sessions.
All right. Bruno, when we hear the term Eurasia, what are we talking about? Which countries are part of this? I've learned from your book that there is a train line between Madrid in the west and Yiwu, right? Is that right? In China. So is Eurasia Europe plus Asia? Or should we be more specific?
Well, we have another term that we could use for Central Asia, which is obviously Central Asia, and I would prefer to reserve Eurasia for the combination of the two continents. Why? If you could put the map back on, I think we see the forces that are shaping the world economy now, and it's not possible to put it back on.
Put the map. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So, we look at the map and we see how this distinction between Europe and Asia is losing relevance. We see the increasing interconnection. We see these two poles developing on two extremes. We see the forces that are pushing for increased integration in the middle. We see the potential that countries like Russia, Kazakhstan, Iran have for becoming bridges between the two main poles of economic development. And then, of course, we see, as you pointed out, that other areas of the world, which from a political point of view are very interesting from an economic point of view, are marginal. And I'm afraid to say that they will remain marginal for the foreseeable future, Africa, Latin America, Australia. So we have its giant supercontinent, which is growing, by the way. And then we have the United States, which continues to be relevant, but perhaps increasingly separate, if we look at the numbers that's confirmed, and clearly dwarfed by the size of this Eurasian economy. So that's what I'm trying to capture in the book. And it's not just about China, it's not just about India. If you look at that map, you realize that Europe is still incredibly relevant in the world economy. In fact, I think perhaps most people here will be surprised by the size that Europe occupies here. And then Japan, Indonesia, parts of Southeast Asia. It's a different world economy. If we had the map here, and by the way, this is 2015. Clearly, this is changing in this direction. If we look at the numbers, before the trade war, it was already the case that Eurasian trade between Europe and Asia was, depending on the years, 3 times the volume of trade along the transatlantic axis and twice the volume of trade along the trans-Pacific axis. And these trends are accelerating because obviously the trade war between China and the US has pushed more trade away from the trans-Pacific axis into the Eurasian axis. And Europe will have to struggle a bit with this influx of Chinese exports that are being diverted from the American market. What we do have is this paradox, I'll finish with that, this paradox that from an economic point of view, these dynamics of growth and integration across Eurasia are so powerful. But from a political point of view, many obstacles remain. And on the question of Russia, since I feel that sometimes in this meeting I'm raising issues that are a bit uncomfortable, but I take it as my task to do that. I work with companies in my job as a consultant, and the question they bring is a lot of concern about risks that they will face if they go into the Russian market. And that has to do with the political tension, but has to do with the structure of the Russian economy, with the fact that Russian business interests seem to be on the front pages of newspapers in the United States now almost continuously. And especially big multinationals are afraid of the risks that they will be accepting if they go into the Russian market. So how will this is my question for the audience here, how will these contradictory dynamics play out? Will the economic integration win and push a certain political thaw and rapprochement between Europe and Russia in particular, or will in fact the politics win? And are we going to see these trends reverse because of tension between Russia and Europe and tension between China and Europe, which is also rising, by the way. So that for me is the main question.
By the way, as we're such an intimate circle here, if you have any comments, any questions, just raise your hand and I'll get to you. Bruno, at the danger of doing even more publicity for your book, there is a fascinating episode about Yiwu. By the way, this is the place where 1/4 of the world Christmas decoration is produced. But there's another fun fact. Describe the city, the various districts in Yiwu, and you say that people during the 2016 U.S. presidential election, when nobody thought Trump would win, the people in Yiwu had a hunch.
Right.
Do you want to share that with
EU
us?
is a fascinating place, just 1 hour by train from Shanghai. I recommend if you're in Shanghai, just take an afternoon off and go there. There's a market with 100,000 stores. 100,000 stores. I made the calculations of how long it would take you to visit the whole market if you spent 5 minutes in each store. It was about 2.5 years or something like that you'd be in the market. And some of the stories that I picked up there were quite interesting. They produce these political flags. About 2/3 of that kind of decoration is produced there all over the world. And they made the conclusion that Donald Trump would win simply because the orders coming from America for Donald Trump flags vastly overshadowed orders for Hillary Clinton flags. And I like to talk about EU because it's a wonderful image of how globalized China has become. There are businessmen arriving in EU every day from Africa, from the Middle East, from India, from Southeast Asia. There are districts developing in the city, a Turkish district, a Arab district, a Russian district. So in a way, we talk about retreat of globalization, but if you go to EU, you see that as one model of globalization, Western-led, is in some respects retreating, there's another one that's rising very fast and spectacularly, this Chinese-led globalization.
We've heard about the legal situation in Russia. You talked about the need of reform. I think one thing is certainly infrastructure, right? From your experience, what is the most needed? And still, the perspective is, how can we bring these two economic blocks together, the Central Asian countries and Europe? Yeah. And does it make sense?
It would make totally sense. And I agree with what Bruno is saying, that we have, and let me come back to what Oleg said, very funny, China with 23 trillion GDP, we sell about 25 million cars in China. USA, 20 trillion GDP, we sell 20 million cars in the US. Europe is 25 trillion GDP, we sell the same amount of cars. It's very funny. And Russia is 3 trillion GDP, and we sold 3 million cars in Russia. So it's almost 1-to-1. So I could do a very good correlation here. And currently Russia is down, as I explained before. Infrastructure, they did a lot. Basically also due to the World Championship, Soccer World Championship. They built a lot of new stadiums, a lot of railway roads. And currently what we, as a business, is more black and white. We look at consumers and markets, and where we see consumers and future markets, this is where we go, because we want to sell our products there. And in order to sell them, you need logistic and transportation. Yes, we look closely at the initiative of China with this new Chinese Silk Road. And currently Russia is doing a lot of infrastructure measurements in order to be with this project. And we see, as a European supplier for plants and equipment, that we can use those transportation in order to supply our goods faster to China. Because currently when the Silk Road, the northern route, we can bring a container in 6 days to China, which is perfect for our business. Faster I can move, as less the logistic costs are, as better it is for our products. And we see, on the other hand, which is very funny, the weak point is the German or the European railway system. I think more infrastructures has to be done, or more investments have to be done in the infrastructure in Europe than what we currently see in Russia and the other countries. And then you have the southern route, which is also interesting for us. We did a lot of business with Iran. Bruno mentioned Iran before, which we currently came to a complete stop due to the sanctions. But also here, if this southern road will be established, and there will be a lot of investments in the southern road. Also, this helps us a lot to transport our goods and to serve those markets. So we are happy if there is infrastructure done, and they do it currently, which is good for business.
Okay. Andreas, your perspective on this. Infrastructure is not only railways and roads, it's also connectivity, it's services. What do you see here as a necessary investment?
I completely agree with what Michael just said, and this is summing up what our clients demand. Our clients, as I just said, companies like Michael's, Dürr Systems, many other companies which are in a similar situation. They produce either in Germany or in China or in other countries, and they want to export to Russia and Central Asia. Some of them are producing parts also in this area, but mostly it's export. So they have to go over frontiers. They have to come over the frontiers, and Michael mentioned the logistics, but there are other frontiers. There are customs frontiers, and there are frontiers which are made out of non-tarifary obstacles, which are different standards and standardizations. So all these obstacles should be abolished in order to have a free market, or a market with less obstacles, less frontiers. And this follows basically the simple model of the European Common Market, which was based on four freedoms. I would just cite them. The freedom of movement of goods and of services, of people, of capital. These four freedoms were implemented in the European Common Market, which led to a great improvement in the wealth of nations in the member states of the European Union, which is still improving, which can still be improved because there's some obstacles still left, or some obstacles are coming new. But if we look between the two blocks you just mentioned, Stefan, the European Union, the Eurasian Union, that we see there are lots more of obstacles and frontiers between these two blocks. If we could abolish them following the system of the freedoms of movement, then we would see an increase in wealth in all involved countries. And abolishing these frontiers would necessarily profit all companies, not only the companies, but the people involved. Every worker, every person, every citizen in the countries would benefit from this abolishment of frontiers. That's why I would support the idea of a common market. To mention this, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, we have Bruno here, who is from Portugal. In Vladivostok, we have some Russian colleagues here. So the idea of a common market, when we look at the map, from the left in the northern hemisphere to the right in the northern hemisphere, this would be one huge common market. And I think the wealth effects would be huge.
Gaukar, your home country, Kazakhstan, is right in the middle of this area. I used to go to the Astana Economic Forum for many years. No, it's in Nur Sultan, of course. And when you go to that place once a year, you see the difference. And for years, Kazakhstan was a kind of boom country. It's interesting, an interesting place because it's sandwiched between Russia and China, so it has to play, very, very particular role geopolitically, but it also has strong ties to Europe, especially Germany. How do you see Kazakhstan more as a European or Asian country? I mean, what would you like to see in your country to happen?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I believe that the question itself is tricky because I don't think Kazakhstan is positioned to be either European or Asian. It is a Eurasian country from its start for many reasons, not only geographically, but because of the population and because of the way of the economics, the geo-economics of which I did one of my first research papers at Skolkovo. But I think for the purposes of this discussion, there are a few points that I would like to outline. First of all, the definition of Eurasia itself. Of course, here we are talking from Lisbon to Vladivostok, that a greater Eurasia, which has been addressed by Vladimir Yakunin a few times in his articles, in his speeches. And however, the term Eurasia, as we understand it at Skolkovo, is the one from OECD, the countries of Central Asia, the Caucasus, Mongolia, Afghanistan, Moldova, and the same term is used by the World Economic Forum. So what is the interest of all these great players, or the giants, as we've heard earlier sessions, in this part of the world? Well, first of all, it's natural resources. I do not want for us to be to have illusions, despite the wishful thinking that we would like to be part of, this global economy. At this stage of our development, these are resource-based countries, not only Central Asia, not only the Caucasus, but also Russia as well. So ideally, yes, of course, I know, in fact, that the Eurasian Economic Commission is working right now in harmonizing the standards of over 5,000 products in order to foster trade. And you've mentioned the freedom of movement of goods, capital, services, and human capital. That is why the Eurasian Economic Union was created. However, there are still some challenges within the Union itself, and in order to be able to be on an equal partnership with the European Union, that's a very long time frame, a huge one, I would say, at this stage, because structurally the economies of our unions, I would say, are very different, very different. But this is what we have now. However, there are huge developments that are going on in this part of the world, thanks to the Chinese initiative of the Belt and Road. Of course, there is a lot of criticisms of Chinese investments and loans worldwide, and some people in this part of the world are aware as well. We wrote a recent report on the Chinese investments in Eurasia, where we call it the Chinese grand strategy in the Eurasian heartland. But a few points that I would like to mark. For example, the emergence of the new infrastructure, the largest dry port on the Eurasian continent, Khargos, which is bordering from Kazakhstan and China. But Kazakhstan is an entry point for the Eurasian Economic Union, so this is a free movement. It's one of the largest new ones. Furthermore, the new port at the Caspian Sea. Now, the Caspian Basin itself, 5 countries, this is what we, there is, if you would look at all the 5 countries, Russia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Iran, and Turkmenistan, these are very energy-rich countries, and a Caspian Convention has been signed in August of 2018. It's a convention that's been in negotiation for 22 years. In order to have the transit to grasp on the opportunity that is offered by the current geoeconomics of the Eurasian landmass, the countries came to an agreement. So we have new ports in Kazakhstan right now. Azerbaijan is expanding its port. They're building another transit line on further to the through Georgia to the Black Sea. So we see a lot of activities going in the transport logistics area, and which in turn is very optimistic for the producers in these countries, because currently the transportation expenses run up to 25% of the cost of the goods. So it's very high, you know. So this is why our goods, as much as we would like to diversify away from the resources economy, are not very competitive. So as a final remark, last week, Uzbekistan had announced that they're considering joining the Eurasian Economic Union. Now that's huge news, because this is the most populous country in Central Asia, 33 million population, and according to the HSBC, they are now in the 26th of the fastest growing economies in the world, with a growth rate of 6%. There are huge economic reforms in the region. So I think that's pretty much issue. One more point, another that I would like to mention, because of Kazakhstan, I'm sure you've heard about the Astana International Financial Center, now in our capital, in Nur-Sultan, which is a financial center would run on the English law. So investors or financial institutions coming to work in this region would feel secure in terms of legal framework, and are offered a lot of opportunities as part of the legal framework that it allows. Currently, I believe there are about 200 companies that have registered already at the Astana Financial Center, and they position themselves as a financing hub for the Belt and Road projects in the region. So thank you.
I remind everybody that Kazakhstan is, of course, playing the European Football Championship in that case, and with that perspective, you are already part of Europe, at least culturally. Vladimir, there's, of course, one country that has a common border with all of these countries, and that is Russia. What are Russia's priorities here? Is it rather to team up with Europe, or with China, or the Central Asian ex-Soviet nations? What is Russia's perspective here?
Well, you know, something that comes to mind immediately to answer the question is something that President Yeltsin once said. He said, the emblem of Russia is the Russian eagle, which has two heads, two-headed eagle. One head is looking to the west. The other head is looking to the east. This is how it was, and this is how it will be in the future. But speaking more seriously about it, you know, if I can briefly comment on something that was said by Andres and by Michael and by Gauhar also, and also by Bruna, the reasons that Russia is not growing today. The popular explanation, and this is kind of a different explanation. I'm not arguing what has been said, but this is a little bit different perspective. The popular explanation is that Russia doesn't have a business climate for investment. Usually you look at a country, the country is not growing, investment are not coming. Foreign investment are not coming. Why? Because the business climate is bad. There are indices of business climate. The business climate includes, you know, contract rights, property rights, control over corruption, infrastructure, skilled labor, this and that. And if you don't do all these things, you don't grow. And then your investment don't come to you and you don't grow. Well, China somehow was not preoccupied by all these things. China started to grow. And once you grow, investors say, wow, business climate is great, you know. This because, you know, the country is growing. We can make profits, yes? Yeah, they have problems with corruption. You have problems with the contract rights. They have problems with the skilled labor. In other countries, skilled labor is, but they're growing. You come there, you want a piece of action. There are different indices. One index is called International Country Risk Guide. The other indices are by the World Bank. There are 6 indices by the World Bank, the government of effectiveness, rule of law, control over corruption, and so on. If you try to chart those indices and see the Russian growth rates and the growth rates of any country for a particular country, then there is a correlation. What is more interesting, if you chart those indices with the oil price for Russia, it's virtually one-to-one correlation, right? Once the oil price goes up, the investment climate is great in Russia. You want peace over action. You want to come. This is the money, where the money. So what is the story of economic miracles in the world? How you achieve high growth rates? You achieve high growth rates not by trying to attract foreign direct investment, but manufacturing growth inside the country, by mobilizing your own domestic savings. These are the stories that we know. These are the East Asian stories. There are 2 countries that did not attract any foreign direct investment, but became developed out of developing. These countries are Japan, without foreign direct investment, and Korea. Taiwan had foreign direct investment. Singapore, Hong Kong had foreign direct investment. But Korea did not have foreign direct investment. They were betting on their own investment. Their own investment GDP ratio was very high, 30% and higher. And China did it without foreign direct investment until 1990. Most people don't know it. In 1990, right after Tiananmen events in 1989, the total amount of foreign direct investment in China was $3 billion. Today it's $500 billion. It's much greater than that. $3 billion is nothing. It's just peanuts. And Chinese growth rates in 1980s for the whole decade were 10% on average. For the decade of 1990s, they were also 10%. So China was growing first without foreign direct investment, then with foreign direct investment. But to trigger the growth process, you need to stimulate your own investment. And then foreign investment come and they say, what a great investment climate. And of course, it's much easier to fix the problem with corruption, with property rights, with infrastructure, with skilled labor, when you have growth. When you have growth, you know, the atmosphere is different and you have the money and you can fix, go to invest the money in the bottlenecks. And the last thing, the Russian problem, the reason that Russia is not growing today. In the first decade of the 21st century, oil prices were high. Russia was enjoying the reign of petrodollars. It was possible to use these petrodollars for investment. Russia was supposed to fix education, healthcare, infrastructure. Yes, today, investment are 50% of what it was in 1990. 1990 was, you know, this is the time when Berlin Wall fell, right? It was the time when the whole Soviet Union started to collapse, right? So at that time, investment were 2 times higher than today. GDP today is higher. A little bit, by the way. Yes, it's roughly at the same level that it was in 1990 in Russia. But investment, GDP includes consumption and investment. So consumption increased, especially personal consumption, but investment did not reach the level of 1990. In the former Soviet Union in 1990, investment in Russia were higher, 2 times higher than they are today. Of course, without investment, you don't grow. In China, investment is 45% of GDP. In Russia, investment is 20% of GDP. And this investment are not enough to just repair the retiring elements of the capital stock, not to say to increase the capital stock and to renovate the capital stock so as to trigger economic growth. So it was possible to make a crucial decision in the first decade. When there was a reign of petrodollars, it was possible not to allow it to precipitate towards consumption, personal consumption, but to fix all public consumption, education and healthcare and infrastructure, and to stimulate private investment. If this would have been done, the share of investment in GDP would increase, right? And then there would be economic growth. Today, it's very difficult to increase the share of investment in GDP. Why? Because there's no golden rain in the form of petrodollars coming, right? So where you get the money? Only from consumption. You cannot cut consumption of the people. It's politically impossible decision. The possible decision would be that next time when oil prices are high, you put aside part of the money. You allow part of them to go to consumption, but part is supposed to be used for investment to trigger economic growth. And then the foreign investors would say, wow, there is growth there. There is action. And we have the opportunity to invest as well. I wonder whether business people would agree with me or not.
Can I answer?
Sure.
Yeah. Yes, of course. And we are back to the discussion and what I said before. There is no medium and small business in Russia. And if you look at Germany, 80% of our GDP is made by medium and small businesses. Those are the hidden champions which we have. I'm from Stuttgart, in Baden-Württemberg, in every little town. And this is what I meant with the reforms, with the missing reforms. If you don't allow small garage shops to develop in an Apple or an Google or whatever, and if you don't give them the chance to develop certain goods, become a hidden champion, then you don't have any investments in your own country. Then you rely on the foreigners to invest and bring in, like Volkswagen, come to Kaluga and build automotive plants there. Russia has, as I said before, the problem, the country is run by the Lukoils and the Gazproms, and that's it, and they're selling natural resources. Currently, I hear a lot of voices due to the sanctions that they say sanctions are good for us, because now we are forced to develop certain things by ourselves in our country, which I can somehow understand, and we see this also. We use a lot of local content when we build our automotive plants, and the local content currently is increasing because we have more small companies which can do certain steelwork, certain stuff for us, which we use locally. So I see a slight effect here, but we need reforms. We have to get, as what I said before, we have to stimulate the small and medium-sized businesses in order to have what exactly you said correctly. And let me, because business, we look at numbers. And coming back to what Andreas said, to have a free trade union is always good for keep peace. I would also say we could do something in this Ukraine conflict if we would have a huge free trade union from Lisbon to Vladivostok. And we made a study, and Bertelsmann Foundation did a study on the numbers. Kazakhstan would increase their real income by almost 2% if we had those huge free trade zones. Germany alone would increase their GDP growth per capita by almost 100 euro. Okay, Germany has 40,000 euro GDP per capita already, but 100 euro is good to have. Russia would increase it by 234 euro, Belarus even more. So all the countries in between Lisbon and Vladivostok would increase their GDP growth, their real income, and they would all do better by doing such a huge free trade zone. And also what I personally see is when we work more together, when we have new investments, we have also a cultural, because there was a lot of political discussion ongoing in the first day. Martin Schmidt said the West is not a decline. I totally disagree. I see that the West is in decline. And I see what you correctly said, the big economic power in China and the big economic power in the US, and they have their own agenda. And I think Europe and Russia kind of get squeezed between them. So I personally think, also from a business perspective, such a free trade zone, or at least working closer together, would help both of us, Europe and Russia, and would probably also help in certain conflicts we have around the world.
I want to pick up on one of the points that you made. I think this is very interesting. The lack of small and medium-sized businesses in Russia. Why is that? Is there no entrepreneurial spirit in Russia, or is it maybe that there is no access to capital? This is, you mentioned the big banks.
Yeah.
Who wants to answer this? Why is there not, or is there enough access, or is it not sufficient, or
maybe one idea. There's, I think, a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. We see that because a lot of entrepreneurial spirits are leaving the country, coming, for example, to Germany, to express their spirit and set up their own companies. Why do they leave the country? Because unfortunately there are some obstacles to implementing their businesses in Russia. I said Russia has made improvements in the ease of doing business, scale of the World Bank, which is true, which is element of order. I see two elements for doing good business in a country. That's order and freedom. So you always have to find a relationship between order and freedom. So there's some improvement in order, but freedom to implement your ideas is maybe lacking a bit. And the safety on long-term investment of your ideas and your personal energy. I think that's why many people decide to leave the country, unfortunately. So what should be done? I think this is nothing innovative, which I have to invent myself, but the good ideas are around. There's a former finance minister in Russia, Mr. Kudrin, who is regularly speaking out about economic reforms. And I think everything he puts forward can be undersigned by the business community. The fact is that for some interests in Russia, this is not interesting. And therefore, I'm afraid this will not be implemented. But on the other hand, I believe this is the free market model of doing business. And therefore, if this would be implemented, as Michael just said, we would see a middle class coming up, economic middle class in Russia. So this is the recipe which should be followed, in my opinion.
Bruno, your comment on all this. We've raised a couple of points here. Where would you like to?
I focus on EU Eurasian Economic Union relations. Well, part of the difficulty has to do with Ukraine, but I won't go into that here. I think there's another topic that is interesting and better for this panel, which I would call the Brexit problem. And I think President Putin realized the Brexit problem before Brexit. A country that wants to associate economically with Europe either has a similar size and dimension, and then, by the way, Europe has real trouble finding a common ground. The EU doesn't have a free trade agreement with the US and doesn't have a free trade agreement with China. Or then it's a smaller country and the EU expects that country to become part of the EU economic order and to accept its rules and its way of doing business. And I tell the story in my book, which may be correct or not, but as I see the story developing around 2004, President Putin realized that this was the case, with questions involving, for example, the regulation of aviation. He realized that the European Union expected Russia to subscribe to European rules. He didn't accept this, and he went out and created the Eurasian Economic Union as a way to then come back to the table on equal terms and be able to negotiate a trade deal that would be not simply a concession to the EU. The Brexit problem, the UK is struggling with exactly the same problem. But evidently, I think it's fair to say that that strategy didn't succeed because certainly the European Union does not regard the Eurasian Economic Union as an equal and is not disposed to have a balanced agreement of that kind, even if we leave Ukraine to the side. So what is the solution to that? It remains unclear. Russia, as a great power, does not accept, just like the UK, does not accept to be incorporated into the EU's economic order. But neither does it have the ability that China and the US have of dealing with the EU on equal terms. I'm not sure how we'll solve the problem. Maybe other members of the panel have suggestions, but I think that is the problem.
Gauka, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, thank you. I just would like to add a point about the, again, partnership of European Union and Eurasian Economic Union. We have a case for decades with Turkey's ambition to become part of the European Union. And where is Turkey right now, and how far is it from its wish that it worked actually quite for a long time to become part of the European Union. And it is an economy that advanced with an 80+ million population, with large small and medium-sized enterprises. So a lot of the ingredients which structurally would make Turkey even closer as part of the European Union than the Eurasian Economic Union. However, that has not happened yet, and we don't foresee that in the near future. At this stage, currently, the Eurasian Economic Union had signed already the first stage of the free trade agreement with China. So why is that happening? Well, this is right next door. I mentioned earlier the transportation costs, which are vast. When we take examples of Asian countries and Asian tigers, we have to keep in mind that they have access to the sea. They have access to ocean, which decreases their prices. And China currently still ships 90% of their exports through the sea. And although we do, I would say, even advertise that our transit route is shorter, it's 14 days instead of the 45 by sea, it is quite expensive. However, it would make it maybe more competitive because it would allow for a multimodal transportation for various parts of the Eurasian landmass. So at this, there is a saying that I've heard in Russia, I found it very fun, but at the same time relevant, is that the world will know what is hunger when the Chinese start looking at rice as a side dish. So this is something that we need to consider, and the agriculture potential of Russia, of Eurasia, is huge, enormous, and with their neighbor next door, with 1.5 billion population, with a growing middle class, with the growing consumer needs, I think this is a great opportunity for the Eurasian Economic Union and all the countries that are a part of it now and will be to harmonize the standards within themselves first to the highest level, and then to match. At this point, we see the development of trade more with China and the Islamic world. One of the numbers, actually, what I've mentioned at the meeting before the G20 in Argentina last year, is that according to our research, Islamic economy in Eurasia, there are about 85 million Russian-speaking Muslims living in this part of the world. So this is something also to consider when we look at all kinds of integration or free trade agreements or all kinds of partnership, which again, I mean, in theory, it sounds great indeed. Ideologically as well, you know, we all aim to have free markets, democracy, and access to capital and high technology and human capital. However, if we were to look in the future and where the global economy is growing, and obviously is tilted into the East, the Asia, and the growing Middle East and North Africa, obviously these are the opportunities, again, considering the resources that these countries have already to build up one in order to match for an equal partnership. Thank you.
All right. Now, I'd like to open it up to the audience. Are there any questions? We've raised a lot of points. We've raised a lot of questions, and obviously we're all looking for answers. Is there any question you have? Any comments you'd like to make? If not, then I think we should go to some concluding remarks. Euros, you've listened to this all. What is your take? What are our main takeaways of this conversation?
My name is Beruz Garligi, despite it was not announced at the beginning. We have a project at the DOC Research Institute, and it is called Eurasian Integration Index. And this is actually, I can say, very much in line with the discussion that we had today. The discussion basically highlighted a few points that are very relevant with the points that basically we would like to cover during the next course of action next year and the following years. Among the points that were mentioned was infrastructure, which is actually, first of all, developing, especially with the presence of Silk Road and Belt and Road Initiative, ranging from China to reach Europe. And as mentioned by Gaukhar, in the case of Kazakhstan, being a gate for China to open, basically to move into Eurasia region. And then as being a part of Eurasian Economic Union and basically expanding to Russia and then Belarus, Georgia, and then enter Europe. And then another element that which was actually mentioned was institutional reforms, which are very necessary for this region. That is also another point that we would like to cover in the project. The World Bank has developed some indices about the institutional quality in the region. We will obviously take that as a benchmark, but we would like to also explore more about the possibilities that institutional reforms could be done, as Andras mentioned, in order to facilitate FDI, in order to facilitate trade, in order to facilitate entrepreneurship, and allowing the young entrepreneurs from Europe and also from the region to open up businesses and basically help integration of this region. So a little bit more about the project, and then the link with the discussion is that we basically try to identify the level of integration within these economies. So I asked this morning, I asked Matthias on what is Eurasia? I mean, which region is called Eurasia? Well, we took the OECD definition, which can be criticized, which ranged from Ukraine to Mongolia, and including Afghanistan, but we have excluded due to data problems and so on. But Andras, he said, is from Lisbon to Vladivostok, all right? And then Gaukhar mentioned some other countries, which, I believe in November 10th, Iran would be officially one of the members of this Eurasian region. And China, then we have the concept of Greater Eurasia, including China and so on. So that is another question which, again, can put forward further questions about this region. But we can more or less agree on the context of the Eurasia to be somewhere between Europe or European Union and Asia, which we believe to be China. And yeah, but one of the points that basically, you know, apart from regulation that Mr. Brose mentioned, and also basically the opportunities that Gauhar mentioned that exist within this region and were discussed, I would like to also point out the importance of cultural ties, which we also try to, I would like to ask this question if we have time, maybe any of these panel members could help. Whether having a past, basically Soviet background would help or no. For example, if you look at Tajikistan, they speak Persian, they speak Farsi, but they have no alphabet. They use the Russian alphabet, or they have their English alphabets to write. So, and then Kazakhstan try to develop, you know, their own basically alphabets, language. They try not to, you know, not to really be influenced by Russian language. So the first language seems to be Russian. Now it's changed to be English, and then, so whether this would facilitate or would hinder the integration within this region. This would be one of my questions. So yeah, that's about this panel, and then we are expecting to basically develop, despite there are criticism about index. Everybody agree, but around the world we have thousands of index that they cover, you know, transparency, corruption, ease of business, and so we also would like to come up with an index that would probably give some signals, you know, of the performance of this region, the countries of the region, whether, there is a reasonable, basically, level of integration among these economies, and then we would compare it with the Eurasian Economic Union, which has 5 members, and then with the entire region, to see if there is a foreseeable, basically brighter future for integration in this region. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, sure.
Before you make the final concluding remarks, I'd just like to note that Kazakh language is not new. It's been there for centuries.
Yes, of course.
What we're changing is the alphabet. So because Kazakh language originally was first in the Arabic, and then in Latin alphabet, and then the Cyrillic Russian, and then now we're back to the Latin alphabet. So that this is the only change. And one more point, since the independence of the country, Kazakh language has been the official language of the country, and Russian language has been the language of the communication, what we say, the language of communication. And this is very important to note, because the language issue seems to be one of the important aspects in the Eurasian Economic Union and Eurasia in general, in large. So, but thank you. Just wanted to correct that part.
Of course, we in this case, we basically take the cultural proximity index, which has been developed by a French institute, and then they have taken care of language and also the distances and so on. But yeah, my question was whether, having like English as being the first foreign language in some of these countries and not to be Russian language, does this mean, in terms of cultural ties, are they try to really still be dependent to Russia, or no, it helps them to be independent and rely on other countries like China or United States or European Union or Japan, other countries? Yeah.
All right. Several last words here. Michael, you were first.
Yeah, I'm first time at this forum, and I think it's fantastic to get in touch with a lot of different people, and we get a little bit a different mindset, and you understand certain things better. As I said, I'm from the industry. Usually business is black and white. You look at numbers and you want to sell your products. But what really was interesting for me, we had a discussion about, and this is coming back to a free trade zone, and the fact that if you do free trade, which is other, that it also supports freedom. This was one of the arguments the European Union always said. This is a big peace concept to have a European Union, so we will never be war again. And if you look at the world today, if you have America, the superpower, spending $1.5 trillion on their army, you have the Chinese developing enormously in their army, 270 billion they spend on their army. They're building up their military power in the Chinese Sea. We have all these conflicts in Syria, the conflict with Iran. Turkey is now moving into Syria with the Kurds and so on and so on. I think in Germany currently everybody is afraid about the climate. And where are the peace protesters we had in former times protesting about Cold War and Pershing? I think there is. I think people forget that war can be quite possible, and if countries developing small and medium-sized nuclear power weapons, that is very, very dangerous. And again, a free trade union, if we would start talking again to Russia as the European Union, would help to make the world safer. And this is what I learned this week here. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, Bruno, do you want one last word?
Yes. I noticed at the beginning that Eurasian trade is already 3 times transatlantic trade and growing. Wouldn't be surprised if Eurasian trade within a few years, a decade, will make up 80% of world trade. Why is that? The main reason, I think, is the complementarities that exist across Eurasia. You have regions that are energy producers, regions that are energy consumers. This, by the way, is why Mr. Session, Igor Session, likes to talk about Eurasia so much, because from the perspective of global energy markets, you have to talk about Eurasia. You cannot talk about Russia in isolation, or Europe in isolation, or China in isolation. You have regions that are developing, regions that are fully developed. You have even, in the case of EU-China relations, EU focusing on software, in new technologies, and China focusing on hardware. So it'd be interesting if either the DOC or some other organization actually studied these complementarities. And is it the iPad? Perhaps. If someone studied these complementarities and had a complementarity index, because if we look at the United States, by contrast, it's entirely possible to think of the United States as an autonomous unit in the world economy, whereas clearly it's something against me. Whereas it's impossible to think of Europe or China or Russia as an autonomous unit in the world economy. On energy, for example, Europe is very dependent on Russia and will remain dependent on Russia. On manufacturing, Europe is dependent on China. On access to markets, China is dependent on Europe. And then we throw in the Middle East and so on and so forth. I think that's a reason why this concept of Eurasia is so important from the point of view of world economy, because it's really, if you look at the map, again, you have one autonomous region, Eurasian, one autonomous region, the United States, and then 2 peripheral, entirely peripheral regions, Latin America and Africa. That's the structure of the world economy today.
All right. I'm glad we are having these technical issues at the very end of the conversation, not at the beginning. Thank you so much for attending. I think we had a great conversation. Thank you all for being here and for contributing, Bruno, Andreas, Gauka, Michael, and Vladimir. And thanks for listening. And I wish you all a nice evening, of course.